Uh, Good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today. My travel makes it possible that I may not be available when this is broadcast. So I wanted very much to take part in the conversation that Robin's put forward. So I'm going to give a resume kind of overall view of how I'm currently seeing publishing and sales of English language books across the Middle East. I don't actually work for the American University in Cairo Press and Bookshops anymore. I left there last year. I now have my own consultancy and sales business called Parkway, and I represent quite a few British and some American publishers all across the region. I'm also writing books, and I do consultation with some booksellers and publishers too in the background, very much Middle East driven. The title of the piece today is Contemporary Cairo, but I'm going to spread the conversation more broadly, because what's happening there is touching pretty much everywhere else as well. I look at the market from Greece to Pakistan and from Iran back to Morocco. So I travel a lot, and of course these days lots of meetings take place like this. So I'm talking to booksellers and publishers. I don't talk directly to librarians, and it's my customers and my publishers who want to talk to librarians where they can. And I think that what I'm discussing here is more the changing state of publishing over the last 10 years and how that's made publishing about the Middle East much more difficult and made librarians and libraries more relevant than ever in being able to be a place where people can find the information they want. I first sold books to the Middle East over 30 years ago. I joined AUC in 1987 and started the general bookshop there, and then went on to be a salesperson traveling the region. And in those days, the market strengths geographically were very different. The key cities, the key bookselling cities were, if you like, the old world, Istanbul, Lebanon, generally, obviously Beirut, Cairo, great histories, Syria as well. But a combination of factors, rising wealth in the Gulf, and the knock-on effect, not a good knock-on effect, of the Arab Spring has shifted the balance. So the good news for publishers, particularly big commercial publishers, is that the Middle East overall is booming. But it's booming because of a growing population, burgeoning money in the Gulf region, and huge sales of best-selling books, the kind of best-selling books that sell everywhere else in the world. Local publishing still has a place, and books which glorify and show the best of cities and countries continue to have their place, often subsidized and sponsored by local publishers or wealthy local people. While that's been progressing and growing, at the other side, the academic university press side of books, and I saw this myself during my years at the American University in Cairo, is that academic presses and university presses have slowly been squeezed out of the bookstore. And that's not a Middle Eastern phenomenon by any means. There are very few places in the great capitals of the world where you can go and find specialist books on regional topics, whether they're history or whether they're contemporary issues. So bit by bit, the kind of specialist quality bookshop that one might dream of visiting has disappeared, and publishers have gone in two separate directions. Academic publishing, university press publishing, has slowly but surely meant smaller print runs, higher prices, in many cases just print on demand, and a book which looks like it should be $25 or $30 is $75 or $85. The publisher's more than aware that they're not going to sell that book into bookshops, but they want to make that content available. So much of that hard work, which may well come from university PhDs and research, is available, and it's available through libraries to everyone. And significantly, one of the most important changes is that through ebooks, anyone, anywhere in the world, if they have the financial resources, the banking system, can read anything. Such books are not censored or stopped from entering countries directly. You just won't see them on the bookshelves of shops. If we take Cairo as an example, censorship since the Arab Spring, I would say, has increased, and definitely in the Gulf too, Saudi Arabia. Almost everywhere now, every book has to be checked before it goes on the shelf. And it's not just politics, there are all kinds of issues. You may have seen recently some major stories about Netflix and the amount of LGBT content in some of their programs. This had an immediate knock-on effect in the Gulf. Some of the very large bookstores found customers complaining. This was driven by customers, and lots of children's books in particular, those with any kind of rainbow imagery, for instance, were taken off the shelves and checked, and many were not returned. So we have to deal with what's in front of us and make the best of it. Right. Overall, I'd say that books are growing in interest, but they're not the kind of books that I suspect many of you would have in your collections, and that's sad, but it's also something we have to live with. I think literature is another place we have to look at and understand. I know Marcia's on the panel today. As someone who worked with the development of Arabic literature and translation in our Hupu program at AUC Press, and in selling the rights to those books as well, it was very challenging to sell Arabic fiction in translation into the Middle East. It struck me as very strange that was the case, but the bookshops are big customers running big systems, and everything is driven by data and sales and success. And as in any form of new literature and new fiction, it's hard to make a breakthrough. And I found it sadly the case that regional support for regional writers was not always as strong as you'd want it to be. And that's always disappointing for the publishers, and of course for the writers themselves, who expect to find their books in the places they want them to be. A challenge for all publishers, and a challenge for all writers. I think I've probably covered there most of the areas that you're going to touch on in your conversation after I've gone. The only other important area to mention is textbook publishing, which when I first started work in the region was really the centerpiece of a lot of bookselling. Shops that were selling significant numbers of foreign textbooks to their students locally piggybacked that very, very lucrative business by widening the range around it and created their bookshops on the back of it. These days, the textbook as a physical entity in the region is almost gone. Publishers have taken the content that was in those books and created learning platforms that are accessible in a totally different way. It's good for the environment, of course, less books, less transport, less all kinds of other things. But it was and has been quite devastating for the bookshops who found themselves completely cut out of that transaction. And that's had a debilitating effect. There are very few genuine university bookstores at all anymore. And they were places that one could place the more serious literature alongside the general bookshops. So there are more books being written and created than ever. They move around the world in different forms, more than they ever did. The Middle East is still a very important market. I mean, it's reached the point now where larger publishers are establishing their own offices for the region rather than servicing them from outside. But the days of the local bookseller supplying the local library and making a nice selection of new literature, new books, I'm afraid is focused on a very small number of stores and very few family businesses that have retained that. Okay, thank you very much. I hope some of that was interesting and might trigger some conversation. I hope your day goes well, and thank you very much for having me. Bye-bye. People, countries directly, you just won't see them on the bookshelves of shops. If we take Cairo as an example, censorship since the Arab Spring, I would say, has increased, and definitely in the Gulf too, Saudi Arabia. Almost everywhere now, every book has to be checked before it goes on the shelf. And it's not just politics, there are all kinds of issues. You may have seen recently some major stories about Netflix and the amount of LGBT content in some of their programs. This had an immediate knock-on effect in the Gulf. Some of the very large bookstores found customers complaining. This was driven by customers, and lots of children's books in particular, those with any kind of rainbow imagery, for instance, were taken off the shelves and checked, and many were not returned. So we have to deal with what's in front of us and make the best of it. Right. Overall, I'd say that books are growing in interest, but they're not the kind of books that I suspect many of you would have in your collections, and that's sad, but it's also something we have to live with. I think literature is another place we have to look at and understand. I know Marcia's on the panel today. As someone who worked with the development of Arabic literature and translation in our Hupu program at AUC Press, and in selling the rights to those books as well, it was very challenging to sell Arabic fiction in translation into the Middle East. It struck me as very strange that was the case, but the bookshops are big customers running big systems, and everything is driven by data and sales and success. And as in any form of new literature and new fiction, it's hard to make a breakthrough. And I found it sadly the case that regional support for regional writers was not always as strong as you'd want it to be. And that's always disappointing for the publishers and, of course, for the writers themselves who expect to find their books in the places they want them to be. A challenge for all publishers and a challenge for all writers. I think I've probably covered there most of the areas that you're going to touch on in your conversation after I've gone. The only other important area to mention is textbook publishing, which when I first started work in the region was really the centerpiece of a lot of bookselling. Shops that were selling significant numbers of foreign textbooks to their students locally piggybacked that very, very lucrative business by widening the range around it and created their bookshops on the back of it. These days, the textbook as a physical entity in the region is almost gone. Publishers have taken the content that was in those books and created learning platforms that are accessible in a totally different way. It's good for the environment, of course, less books, less transport, less all kinds of other things. But it was and has been quite devastating for the bookshops who found themselves completely cut out of that transaction. And that's had a debilitating effect. There are very few genuine university bookstores at all anymore. And they were places that one could place the more serious literature alongside the general bookshops. So there are more books being written and created than ever. They move around the world in different forms more than they ever did. The Middle East is still a very important market. I mean, it's reached the point now where larger publishers are establishing their own offices for the region rather than servicing them from outside. But the days of the local bookseller supplying the local library and making a nice selection of new literature, new books, I'm afraid is focused on a very small number of stores and very few family businesses that have retained that. Okay, thank you very much. I hope some of that was interesting and might trigger some conversation. I hope your day goes well, and thank you very much for having me. Bye-bye.
Okay. So that was my old pal Trevor. So I asked him to, I asked all the speakers to, I suggested prompts for them to respond to, but Trevor had to sort of give his whole spiel all at once. What I'd like to do next is I like to go from one speaker to the next and ask them to, give the brief introduction to you and your work that we discussed, and then to open the conversation. And the conversation I would like to occur not only amongst my speakers, but also with you guys here in the room. I, really welcome your interventions because these are content creators and content disseminators that you may not necessarily have direct contact with yourselves in the course of your daily work. So I'd like to start, let's see, I'll start with Yasmine because you're immediately to my right here. So Yasmine, would you please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm Yasmine El Dorghamy. I publish Rawi. Rawi is an annual periodical on Egyptian history and heritage. We started in 2010, exactly 1 month before the January 25th uprisings, and I've been on survival mode ever since. But it's doing reasonably well. There's a lot of interest in Egyptian history and heritage, but one needs to be creative to stay relevant and also to stay afloat. We produce a lot of content online, publishing articles on our website, but the cornerstone is really the annual publication. Robin has the 9th edition there. We pick a topic every year, and we do a history of it. So this was the year we did a history of the cinema industry. The year before that, we did a history of modern Egyptian art. After that was our most popular one, history of food, tracing what Egyptians have been eating, well, from ancient Egypt all the way to the mid 20th century. After that was last year's edition on the history of costume, which was also very interesting to work on and very well received. And we're now wrapping up the history of medicine, of healing practices. And next year, planning to work on the history of music. So I am taking this opportunity with all of these wonderful librarians out there with wonderful collections at your disposal. I am going to start looking for information for sources on the history of music in Egypt, especially after late antiquity. So if there's any way you can help me start gathering information on that and looking for researchers and specialists, please reach out to me. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yasmine. That's terrific. And I'll just sort of add before I move on, if I can make a contribution to Rawi, so can you. So, and the other thing that is very nice about the publication, we often talk about equity, and all of the material in Rawi appears in both Arabic and English. So I wrote my contribution in English, and she arranged for it to be translated into Arabic, and I was really grateful for that, because we often talk about, you know, the extractive nature of academic research, and this was a way to give back, and I was very proud of that. So I will move on now. I will call on Nadia Wassef, because you're next on my screen. So Nadia, would you unmute yourself and please introduce yourself to us?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Robin, for this opportunity. And I just have to say that I'm a very, very big fan of Marcia and Yasmine's work. So I'm very, very thrilled to be here. So in 2002, I co-founded, along with my sister and a very good friend of ours, the Corner Bookstore in Zamalek, which is a suburb of Cairo. And 20 years on, it's now a chain with 8 outlets. We were 10 at one point, but you know, as a result of survival mode, which when Yasmine said it, I knew exactly what she meant. Especially during the revolution years. So we went down to 6, we're now back up to 8. And this is a number that changes frequently, I have to say, in response to very harsh economic times. And we also have a publishing house now. I don't know, Robin, would you like me to start on the part about how we got into this, or shall we keep that for later?
No, you can. That can be part of your introduction, please. Yeah, thank you.
Well, the synopsis of how I landed into a career of bookselling is simply by not knowing better. Is the only thing I can say, in all honesty. This was a personal time in me and my sister's life where we had given up on development careers, and we just felt that, you know, the world wasn't going to change anytime soon, and it was this idea of if we could do anything that was meaningful and that could spark a change, what would it be? And it was to open this bookstore that we had dreams of frequenting. And it then turned out that other people shared that dream. But had I known what the next 20 years of my life would look like, I'm not sure I would have done this. So I did it not knowing, and I'm very grateful that I didn't know. But that's how this career started. And I'll pass it on now. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Nadia. And and I want to say, when I went back to Cairo in 2004 and found the Diwan bookstore, it was just so wonderful, such a beautiful place to be, such a beautiful selection of books, such beautifully laid out, and also all the little extra things that you guys made. like T-shirts with heritage advertising on them. I still have my Bimbo cookie T-shirt, and my Rapso washing soap T-shirt. So it was a wonderful place to have. And also the other thing that I noticed recently, because of some other research I'm doing, is that you guys have recently got the rights to publish the Mahfouz translations, which are being produced with the most beautiful cover art. I mean, just absolutely gorgeous, evocative cover art of Old Cairo. Okay, so thank you, Nadia, and I'll pass on now to Marcia to give her a little introduction. Thank you.
Hi, and I did I unmute myself? Yes. And I just want to say about the bookshops that I moved to Cairo right before the first Diwan opened on 26th of July Street, and what an enormous transformation it made to the literary scene and to book buying in Cairo. Not just because the Diwans themselves, but they inspired other bookshops in the same vein, bookshops where you could go and browse and have a coffee and feel comfortable. And so really, like so many other people, I'm so grateful to Nadia's sort of bumbling into or doing this without thinking. And so I also am going to answer Robin's first prompt about what brought me here. And what experiences did I bring with me, which is an interesting way of looking at it that I never have talked about in an introduction. So I had just the ArabLit project started out online. It's the website ArabLit.org. And I had come from teaching literature as a graduate instructor, and I was coming at it from a literary criticism lens. And I sometimes say that I was in 2009, I was the last person in Cairo to open a blog. And that was the initial idea for ArabLit. Was I thought I was speaking in this sort of unidirectional way. I was going to be, passing on my literary criticism ideas, thoughts to a sort of a public. And if I've learned anything, it's that instead the book world is much more multi-directional, and it's much more about conversations and communities around literature versus, speaking to people. And so that's really what the website became. It became I discovered really quickly that there had not been this kind of hub, that people working on Arabic literature were not only spread out across, 20-odd countries where people write Arabic literature, but also because of diaspora and because translators live everywhere around the world. And there wasn't sort of central information about what was going on with Arabic literature and translation. So that became the website. So the website, which then became a magazine in 2018, and I only have just this one cover. Last weekend was the Marrakesh Book Festival, and I sold out everything happily. And it also became a short story prize, a podcast, and on Monday we will publish our first book. So what the magazine came out of, and as well as the book, is it sort of came out of this community. So as people people sort of were looking for things, emerging translators were looking for places where they could publish translations. Authors were looking for ways to, new audiences, new ways to reach audiences. That weren't in this kind of, these very specific frames that sometimes English language publishers were looking for, like the liberated women's story or the East to West story or these. So we did much like Yasmine. We have themed issues. We had one on the kitchen, which similarly was quite popular. We had one on song. This is the folk issue. So we tried to. The most recent was weddings. We try to reach literature from a different angle than is typically being sort of talked about in translation. We publish multilingually in the publication, English and Arabic, but also sometimes also translate into French or Dutch. I like multiple translations. I think they're fun. The magazine came to be a space for emerging translators and less translated authors where they could be celebrated, mentored, edited professionally and paid for their work. Because the website is not a place where we're capable of paying people. It's a crowd-funded enterprise. It is supported by the readers and a very small handful of advertisers. And we try to keep it as open as possible to people across the region. So when I was speaking at the Marrakesh Book Festival and meeting young people who wanted to translate or be published, we try to make as many spaces as possible to create spaces for the literary community. I don't make a tremendous amount of money off of it, but that's okay. Or really any money off of it at all.
Okay, thank you so much, Marcia. And since I'm putting in a little plug for everybody, I'll just say that my MESA paper that I'm giving on Thursday is my failed attempt to contribute to ArabLit Quarterly because I could not meet Marcia's deadline. I just could not, but it turned into my MESA paper. And so if you're sticking around on Thursday, you'll be able to hear, well, it's still in a very, it took more work, Marcia, than I even imagined to put it together. So, but I was not able to contribute to your beautiful issue on song, but at least you sort of gave me the catalyst to do something else with the work that I started for you. So I thank you for that. I'm going to, let me see, we are at the half-hour point, so that's fine. So I'm going to ask a few more questions of my own, and then I would like to invite my colleagues who are here in the room and my colleagues who are online to please certainly ask your questions. I'm going to ask my pals here who are helping me managing this to help me manage the chat because I can't do all these things at once. So I'm going to start, I think you've all touched a little bit on the idea of audience, and you're dealing with potentially a very different kind of audience than like most of us here in this room deal with. You're dealing certainly with people who are interested in Egypt specifically, who are interested in Middle Eastern things in a more general way, and they may be very well read in those things, but they are still not necessarily academics, or they're just interested persons. And most of you are also dealing in your work with people who maybe have no background in anything Middle Eastern, people who are maybe tourists in Cairo who find the Diwan bookstore and drop in, people who are staying in a hotel and they find a copy of a Rawi in the hotel room, this sort of situation. And I wonder if maybe each of you could comment a little bit on who it is that you're trying to approach with your work and anything that you've learned about that in the process. So who would like to start? Or should I just call on you? Okay, go ahead, Mike.
I can, because this is something that sort of ties into what I was just saying. Simply because, so when I first opened ArabLit, the website where I imagined I'm speaking to people, I also imagined, like some people in publishing still do, that they're publishing for this sort of imaginary white guy in Ohio. That how is this, how is the white guy in Ohio going to, this is randomly a book on my desk right now, going to receive Jabir Dwahi's Sharid al-Manzil, Firefly in English. And I sort of very quickly found out that was not my audience. My audience then and throughout, and even as it grows, is multilingual Arabs, the Arab diaspora, translators not just necessarily between Arabic and English, but translators tend to be interested generally in other translated literature. They could be translators from Korean or whatever. So people who are interested in world literature, Africans, Caribbeans, and of course more women than men buy books. So I think what I've discovered, what's most interesting about this audience is that sometimes when publishers are like, oh, is this imaginary person in the Midwest or in whatever in Northern England going to understand these references? I think that's sort of, missing the point entirely. You can create an audience from all these other places, and so many other people are interested. The most interested audience I had for wanting to know more about Arabic literature and translation was when I was invited to Lagos to speak to publics there, and so many people were like, we need to get more Arabic literature and translation here in bookshops in Lagos. And of course, I know distribution is one of your topics, and distribution is definitely an issue. I'm going to mute myself.
Great, thank you so much. Who else would like to respond about audience? Go ahead, Nadia, please.
I would just like, my comment on audience spans a 20-year window. So when we first started, we were trying to engage readers again. And this was a good time. The early 2000s in Egypt was a time where things were changing. Imarati Yaqoubian, which was our first Egyptian bestseller in decades, had hit the pavements and the bookshelves and was being sold and read by everyone. It was a moment of change. And so we wanted to bring people through our doors. 20 years on, and over the span of a day, you know, you had mothers and children in the mornings, you had people coming in for their lunch hour, you had people meeting up at night, you had, you know, I mean, the clientele that we were attracting through our doors changed significantly, and we were open 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we only closed one morning in all of 365 days. So we had a lot of raw material to analyze our audience. 20 years on, what I would like to say is that frequenting a bookstore, we have learned today, is not cost efficient. It's not the most effective way of buying a book. And in many ways, people don't need to do it anymore. So I'm going to come out and say that the reason people still frequent bookstores and still hold on to their booksellers is for the community and for the knowledgeability and for actually the most intangible thing that we as booksellers sell, which is a browsing experience. We don't actually sell books. We sell the experience of browsing. And once you have that, you can, and for me, I don't see social media or the online world as the death of bookstores. I see it as a way of marketing yourself to a broader audience and enticing them into a conversation. And this is what Marcia was saying about her website. It is, in my mind, bookselling is a conversation. Just like your website was a conversation, for us, we were having conversations with people with the way we put books next to one another as a way in our displays. It was commentary. It was also, if I can jump into language, and I will stop talking because this is just, I talk too much, I know, but one of the things that we did in our displays, we had a section called Egypt Essentials. And this included Arabic, English, French, and German books from history, cooking, biography, psychology, you name it. But it just had to have the Egypt hook. And it was a way of merging languages and collapsing disciplines and sort of like showing the binary oppositions not as binary oppositions. And again, trying to cross-contaminate, you know, to bring in, if you had never read biography before, maybe if we introduced it to you via a cookbook, something like Colette Rosson's Apricots on the Nile, which is both biography and cookbook, maybe we could sell you that or open your eyes to something different. Sorry, I know I went on a lot, forgive me.
That is wonderful, thank you, Nadia, and you don't talk too much, you talk perfectly, sufficiently to the task. And so, Yasmine, would you like to respond?
Yeah, Diwan was my favorite hangout in the early 2000s, and still is, of course, but in the early 2000s, that's where I spent a lot of my time, not just buying and browsing, but also hanging out at the cafe and with my laptop or notebook, writing little Rawi proposals that I would take to sponsors or show to writers or, you know, collaborators. And so, yeah, it's a place that inspired me and many others, and it was a refuge for many of us who were thinking up of projects like Rawi during that time. And as for my audience, it's similar to Marcia's a bit, a little more more on the Egyptian side, but very similar. And also, it depends on the topic. When Rawi started out, the first 6 editions were kind of general. The focus, the approach was to be diverse, was to publish in each edition a variety of articles to showcase the vastness of Egyptian heritage. So something on architecture, something Coptic heritage, Islamic heritage, ancient Egyptian, and so on. And so variety was what we were going for. And then when Rawi turned into an annual publication rather than a wannabe quarterly, because the quarterly thing didn't work out, when I finally came to terms with the fact that I would only be able to print it once a year, I said, okay, let's make this count. And so it doubled in size, and we started to translate everything instead of just translating part of it, because that was an added expense. But that also turned out to be a very, very good move, and worth it. We started taking the thematic approach, and the thematic approach in this approach we try to do a sort of encyclopedic coverage of the topic, and so the audience would change with each topic. When the modern art edition came out, everybody who collects, everybody who studies, professors of art at private and public universities in Egypt and also abroad they all wanted a copy, because there was, at least at the time, there was very little published on modern Egyptian art. Something else about Rawi, I really like obscure subjects, things that very, very few people published books about. And so at the time, modern Egyptian art was getting more exposure in the auction houses. People were hearing about these paintings being sold, but not finding almost any books. It was just Lilian Carnouk's book, which is fantastic, but it had come out 10 years before, and there hadn't been really anything else since. So that's the modern art edition. The cinema edition was very popular among the cinema community. The food edition, chefs are buying it in Egypt and looking and checking out the medieval and ancient Egyptian recipes, and some of them have been incorporated in menus in Egypt and abroad. So we got chefs to read about Egyptian history. The one after that on costume has been very popular with fashion designers. And so I met more than one fashion designer here in Egypt who based a collection on that edition. So it's been really fun doing this focused thematic approach that also tries to answer the questions that non-specialists ask. One of the goals of Rawi has always been to sort of bridge the gap between academia and the general readers, because a lot of my friends are historians and archaeologists, and they give talks and lectures. Well, here in Egypt, you see the same people at all the talks and all the lectures, and they publish their papers in peer-reviewed journals that are read by their peers and very small closed circles. And then on the other hand, whenever there's an archaeological discovery or a resurgence of interest in history because some movie came out or anything, the general public reads articles written by journalists who put them together really quickly, and really that is the history that reaches them. So we're trying to sort of be that mediator. We're trying to take the research and the academic content that usually circulates in a small circle and repackage it for a general audience. So in that sense, we're trying to gain as wide an audience as possible. I always ask the contributors to think as they are writing, to keep in mind that they could be writing for a dentist or an engineer. So would a dentist find this interesting? Would a dentist understand these terms? So don't get too technical. So I like people to write about their own research. Of course, we edit with the writers, but yeah, we write keeping that dentist in mind.
That white guy in the middle of Ohio. Or maybe not. So we've touched a little bit on language. Maybe one of you would like to elaborate on the impact of language, how it shapes what you do, and like that.
I'll just add something. I mean, about language, a lot of the content that's published in these peer-reviewed journals that are only read in small circles is usually published in English or French or German. And so another thing that we are doing now is translating, maybe not translating those articles, but bringing that work to an Arabic-speaking reader, academic and non-academic reader, because it's it turned out to be a very, very important thing to do.
Yeah, thank you. Would anyone else like to comment?
I could just say, so we have, I'd just say two things. One is that when I lived in Egypt, that I sort of imagined only Arabic and English. But now I live in Morocco. And so part of publishing the magazine has been working with bringing different Amazigh literatures into Arabic and English. And also then, it sort of has broadened my sort of outlook to include also Kurdish literatures and other literatures being written across the sort of Arab majority region. And then the other thing that I was going to say, I can no longer remember. So now Nadia has to say something.
Well, I'm going to take a post-colonial dive and say that my Arabic is not very good. And so that was one of the things that was always a challenge for me personally. And I let it color my book selections. I am conscious that in Egypt, there is this sort of post-colonial condition where people are floating between multiple languages, because sometimes schooling in Arabic is not the best that it can be. And therefore you have a whole generation of people that have been alienated, that are hovering, and I'm one of them. And so for me, when I started reading Arabic literature, I was reading it in translation. And I also think that that helped make a lot accessible for me. And that was one of the people, this was a sort of a stereotype of an audience that I was thinking of Arabs that were alienated from Arabic. And I was trying to bridge that gap by offering Arabic literature in translation and the originals as well. And I want to go back to the distribution channel thing. We just sort of very lightly touched on that. But I think one of the biggest challenges that faces us in the Arab world and Africa is the poorness of distribution channels. And, up until recently, I think book fairs was the way that publishers managed to disseminate, and we all know the publishers are coming to the book fair, they're bringing their stuff, they're not taking any of it back. And everyone's going to just buy up what there is because, it's not cost efficient. The supply chains aren't there. The volume isn't there for ordering for retail ordering and continual the upkeep of your bookshelves in a sense. And I think that's one of the things that ebooks has helped. And that, the websites have also helped. And I think that this is something that's been very important, especially in Africa and the Middle East. And I'm hopeful I know the tech revolution has its downsides, but I see the upsides more, to be honest.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We're getting close to our end of time. I want to leave time for questions, but, oh, there's a hand up. Oh, my God. Okay, Mohammed, would you please do the honors? So, and would you please, when you speak, identify yourself for the benefit of our speakers and also for the benefit of our online audience? It's not on.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Nadine Ashkar from Overdrive. It was nice meeting you, ladies. I wanted to ask a question about, did you consider opening new sales channel and convert your content to ebooks or even audiobooks and sell worldwide? Maybe Nadia just mentioned ebooks. So in your collection, do you have physical books, strictly physical books, or you do have ebooks and audiobooks?
We also publish everything as an ebook. We have not yet converted anything to an audio, but actually it's a pretty appealing idea. Yes, ebooks is a really important way we have, although many people, as I said, we're launching our first book on Monday. And it has been a really difficult process of I'm printing some copies in India to ship to bookstores in the Gulf, and I'm printing some copies in Europe. I'm printing some copies in North America, and I'm coming, as Nadia said, in person to the Cairo Book Fair with my suitcases full of books. So yes, ebooks are really important. I would just say that there are some access problems. We have found, for instance, that our readers in Lebanon are blocked from using their credit cards on some of the platforms that we've used to distribute. So there still are some issues that we've had with ebooks, and so many readers still do want to hold a paper thing in their hand, especially with a magazine. I mean, having a Rawi in your hand, and being able to turn the pages and see the beautiful images is such a different experience versus reading it on a screen.
Can I just jump in and also plug Marcia's podcast, Boulet, which I really, I listened to the Radius one recently, and I was sort of like cheering on, and so thank you. So I'm just going to have to plug that in passing.
One more thing I'd like to add. What I meant by selling your ebooks or maybe production of audiobooks is to sell to institutions like libraries, schools. This is where we were talking about audience and the variety of audience. I come from Overdrive, which is like the leading distributing, I don't know if you know, distribution, digital content in the world. I do manage the Middle East. I work closely with publishers, almost all of them. I was at the Abu Dhabi Book Fair, and I touch success stories. I'm from a generation who grew up reading physical books, and I still love it. I'm not gonna deny it, but we are looking 10 years from now. I do tend to talk a lot, so.
Yes, so we did do audiobooks specifically for a library audience, and we're distributed by Exact Editions. We did ebooks specifically for a library audience, and we're distributed by Exact Editions.
We have Amina has a question, Mohammed. Oh, George, so does George. I'm so sorry. Go ahead, George.
Oh, that's fine.
Please.
It's okay. Hi, I'm George Fauzi, Layla Books, Cairo, Egypt. I want to comment on 2 points you raised. The first thing is the ebooks in the Arab world. For the time being, I think it's a bit early. The ebooks, it's quite early even. And the second thing is the distribution. It's a big problem, distribution of books in the Arab world for several reasons. Mainly, there are no channels, censorship, it's a big issue nowadays, and bookshops even. It's the presence of bookshops is diminishing day after day. You have publishers every day popping in. They publish 1-2 books, and then that's it, they vanish after that. Or the new trend that you have authors who are coming, and they pay for the publishers to publish their books, and then after this, they vanish. So it's a lot of problems regarding the distribution and how to capture the books and how to distribute the books and to find the books. I mean, it's a big, big problem, not only in Egypt, but the entire Arab world. So I just wanted to comment on those 2 points, the ebooks and the distribution. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just jump in for 1 second to say, I guess I better stand in front of the camera. As a librarian and as librarians in the room, we depend very much on our vendors to help us solve the distribution problem. And so we hand that problem over entirely to our beloved vendors who do quite the job of running all around the country and all around the world, getting the stuff that we need for our collections. So it's distribution is a huge problem. And if any of you would like to say anything more about that. Or maybe not. That's okay. That's fine.
The whole idea, the whole subject of print is just so difficult, print and distribution. I'm facing major problems now because Rawi is getting very expensive. Like Trevor was saying, how a book that costs $20 is being sold for $75, and the university press knows they can't sell it, but they do it. They can afford to do that. And I've always sold Rawi for less than a third of its price because I distribute with Al-Ahram, which is the biggest distributor in Egypt. It's sold in Egypt and in London. And in London, I only have the British Museum Bookshop. I send it to them directly in the mosaic rooms. And other than that, it's distributed. I had a private distributor I worked with in Egypt, and I called him last year when the costume edition came out. And he's like, yeah, Ustaz, there aren't any distributors anymore. Nobody does this anymore. I do something else now. And he started a business. And yeah, no, there aren't any more distributors for books in Egypt. Only the government owned, the big government owned ones. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's just
it's very
it's just getting really difficult. Yeah. And as for ebooks, I'm actually transforming Rawi at the moment and still figuring out the format. Perhaps not an ebook, but at the moment, all of the Rawi articles are available for free on the website. We're trying to keep Rawi advertiser supported. Content can stay for free, and it's not one ebook. They're individual articles, like sort of in a journalistic style. So you share them individually. But we're starting a podcast. I'm a big fan of Bullet, by the way, and yeah, we're exploring more digital formats now because that's become very, very important. It's you can't survive without that. But honestly, I love print. I wish I could just focus on print. It's a dying art form, and that the artistry of just taking content that can sometimes information that can not necessarily always be very interesting, and just using art and design to transform it into something beautiful and fascinating. That is just a pleasure that you can never get out of a tiny little telephone screen. And people use their phones. They don't even use laptops. So most of the time. So even, I mean, we're redesigning our website and we're redesigning it into this cutting edge experiential sort of thing. But all of the really cool tools that you use on websites, experiential and interactive websites, are optimized for computer screens. But the problem is most people don't even use their computer. They use their phones. And there's very little that you can, there's very little interest, there's very little you can do with a phone screen, really. Yeah, it's, I'm glad Nadia's optimistic about like this digital trend, but I'm just,
Look, I'm gonna jump in and say that there is a long process at play here, and I think, I mean, when I cast my mind back, and Marcia will remember this, and as will you, Yasmine, when we started in the early 2000s, we struggled with the fact that a lot of Arabic books didn't have ISBNs, and this was an issue, that. And it was held to track sales, to track warehouse, to track inventory, to track anything. And, and when you have a revolving inventory of hundreds and thousands of titles, it is a very big problem. And that has changed over time. I actually think that one of the interesting things about books bookselling, publishing. I think that we need to start having a different conversation about it. And I think it's unfortunate that we have fallen into a retail mode, an economic mode, where the numbers have to add up. Whereas actually, books, publishing, bookselling should not be treated as a retail business. It should not be treated as a commodity. It has to be treated as a humanitarian service, almost, as something that is enriching, that is beyond just a mere item that has a bottom line and a top line, and we buy and we sell, because it is not sustainable. It never has been. You know, bookselling, publishing, and we can't be at the whim of the cost of paper and the cost of ink. We have to be treated economically differently in taxation structures, in access to raw materials. We really do. And this is something where I think readers, writers, people with vested interest need to step up and defend this commodity and defend this thing and re-envision it outside of an economic system that actually cripples and undermines it and undervalues it, simply because we are not about the numbers. We are about so much more than that.
The conversation is getting really interesting, and we have got to wind up. We have one question in from our audience. I'd like to give her a chance, and I would like to ask Amina, please make it a short question, and a response from you guys, also very short. Thank you. Go ahead, Amina.
Thank you. My name is Iman Kopecki. I currently work for State Department, but before that, I used to work in academic settings as a librarian. And even before that, which is most important, I used to work as a journalist for Ahram Weekly. So I commend you ladies on your efforts, despite the fluctuating currency and all the harsh economic circumstances in Egypt right now. I have since moved to Nairobi, and they are facing the same issues you are facing. So my question to you is, what kind of advocacy group do you envision, hopefully, that can relay your challenges so that you can start to actually apply some solutions, especially in the way that Nadia just explained? Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. Very briefly, please, my friends.
I don't know, but I've always envisioned some kind of trans-Saharan publishing collective to share solutions on how to move literature around, not just say, at least, you know, distribution across Arab majority countries is really impossible, but moving it from, say, North Africa to Nairobi is 1,000 times more difficult. So I would love to see problem solving and solution possibilities between groups that have sort of not been able to, not found ways to be in conversation thus far.
Yasmine or Nadia, last words?
I've spoken enough. Thank you.
Everybody just laughed in the room. Yeah, I want to thank you all so very much for your participation in this. Let me come, I'll come around the front. Okay. I will thank you ladies so much for your participation in this and for your active involvement and responding to the questions so well. This was really a privilege for us to have you come and speak to us. We don't get this kind of chance very often. And thank you for participating in our very important 50th anniversary conference. And I will see you guys around. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for your attention and listening. Thank you.